Since society has allegedly advanced in the past several hundred years, torture methods aren't really a thing anymore. Sure, we might waterboard somebody every now and then, but back in medieval times, there were so many different methods to torture criminals. I don't recommend you go any further in this video if you get a little queasy in your stomach, get a little sick looking at things. Because today we're going to be talking about some of the most insane torture methods to ever exist. And yes, these are 100% real. The wooden horse originated in France, but saw most of its use during the American Civil War as a way to torture captured Confederate soldiers and a way to punish their own Union ones. Basically, it was this stool that came to a point and people would sit on it and have it be raised so their feet would dangle, and then they would tie weights to the feet to pull somebody down. Basically pulling somebody apart by the crotch. Confederate soldiers would refer to the wooden horse as Morgan's mule for some reason, and there were records saying that men were being strapped to this device for over 2 hours a day. Most guys weren't able to finish the ride due to passing out from pain, and very few people were actually able to walk after being untied. Thankfully, this device disappeared around the 1870s. For now. Nobody likes being tickled. I think that's a rather uncontroversial statement because the feeling of just being strapped down and tickled when you don't want to sucks. I hope everybody agrees. But what if we took tickling and took it to the absolute extreme and actually made people go insane from it? The practice of tickle torture dates back all the way to ancient Japan, and the idea of mercilessly tickling somebody was used as a form of punishment. Research was also recently done on over 150 participants who went through tickle torture, and they vomited, they peed their pants, and they passed out. It's also theoretically possible to tickle somebody to death. Well, the form of tickling won't kill anybody, but you can die from asphyxiation or a heart attack. Although I haven't found any record of somebody dying from this, but it's possible. There's also a form of tickle torture where they bring in a goat. So what they do is they take your feet and they soak it in salt water for like 24 hours, and then they kick back the chair that you're tied to, so your feet are like up in the air, and then they bring in a goat, and the goat licks the salt off your feet. The goat doesn't stop licking. He licks to the bone. Many people just die from infection after this. You've probably heard of the term kneecapping and used when saying somebody's success or momentum suddenly got pulled from them. But the term actually originates from the real torture method of kneecapping. This is when they would take a low velocity handgun, press it to the armpit of your knee, and pull the trigger. Despite the name, kneecapping doesn't actually fracture the kneecap. It just completely destroys all of the soft tissue, taking away somebody's ability to walk. Fans of the Saw franchise would probably recognize the device called the rack, but very few actually know that it was a real thing, just not as elaborate. The rack was a long wooden structure that people were tied to and then just cranked and cranked and cranked. And they would stretch their body so far that their limbs and all the muscles and tendons that you have would just start ripping. People have wrote reports of what the victims sounded like during this process, and it will haunt your nightmares. Don't look it up. And to make matters worse, while you are having your legs and arms just ripped out of your body, they would also start ripping off your toenails and fingernails. Why are they gonna go for the fingernail, man? What the fuck? The rack dates back to 4th century BC, where the Greeks would actually torture slaves with it. It was also found in Britain and Russia during the 16th, 17th century, but thankfully during modern times, there's no rack anywhere, hopefully. But that was until it showed up in the kids' TV show SpongeBob. How was that supposed to clear as suds? And the next one is probably the weirdest name I've ever heard for a torture device. The Scavenger's Daughter. This was an A-shaped metal rack where the person's head would be tied to the top of the A and the legs would be tied to the legs. And it essentially did the opposite of the rack. They would crank it and it would contract and contract, bringing the victim's knees to their face, just slowly crushing them. People would bleed from their ears and their nose and their eyes, and this was a torture method that was heavily used during the reign of King Henry VIII. What a fat bitch. One form of torture that I personally find interesting is called white torture. Yeah! This is where they dress you in all white and put you in an all white room where you only it's given to you to guards that are wearing all white. They completely deprive you of your sense of color, and this drives people mad. My toxic trait is thinking that I can handle it. Aren't you glad we live in a modern age of punishment where if you do something wrong, you just get locked away with a bunch of other people who did something wrong? Yeah, me neither. Stay out of trouble, kids. The goat does not stop licking. He licks until he reaches bone. Many people just died from infections. Despite the name, kneecapping doesn't actually fracture the kneecap. It just destroys